Over 2 years, she disclosed bit by bit that they were deceased. Like crucial falsehoods often do, it emerged casually during conversations when one isn't prepared. Comments about lacking relatives to invite, offhand remarks at Christmas regarding the loss of sentimental feelings for holidays due to lack of companions, and a quiet revelation on a Sunday morning that she had been virtually alone since age 23. These were her disclosures. I accepted her truth. Indeed, I believed her. As a social worker, I encounter individuals daily who bear loss that many can hardly fathom, and I have learned to identify the distinct burden of genuine sorrow a person carries. Wren bore that burden. I could feel it in her silent moments, in her reluctance to discuss her hometown. In an instant, whenever someone spoke of their parents nearby, she gazed towards the inaccessible. I popped the question on a frosty Saturday evening in November, under the illuminated Capitol Dome, overlooking the Kentucky River in downtown Frankfort, while we were both strolling across a bridge. Before my query was fully uttered, she agreed. She took hold of my face with both hands and accepted, and her expression at that moment was the most vulnerable I had ever seen from her. 9 months on, with 70 guests gathering at a venue in Lexington, a photographer engaged, and rehearsal dinner planned, I discovered Wren's parents were alive. Not merely alive, they resided a mere 40 minutes from our apartment where we'd spent the past 2 years of our shared life. They had been a mere 40 minutes away the entire time. Driving to that address revealed a troubling truth hidden within a tranquil Lawrenceburg, Kentucky residence, which took years for me to comprehend and forgive, though not as you might imagine. If you're new here, subscribe instantly and enable notifications. Comment below. Have you ever discovered a secret about someone you loved that fundamentally altered your perception of them? I read every comment. Press the like button if this story resonates with you. I'm Owen Marsh, aged 36, a family services social worker in Kentucky for the past 11 years, based in Frankfort. My career has exposed me to the full spectrum of familial capabilities, from extraordinary love to devastating harm, often coexisting under one roof. You would assume this extensive exposure would render me immune to shock, but you'd be wrong. Let's delve into it. You're mistaken. I hail from Lexington, sandwiched between 2 other siblings. My parents, still together and residing in the same house on Palomar Drive, are the ones who taught me to ride a bike and witnessed my first failed driving test in the school parking lot nearby. My eldest brother Theo dwells in Cincinnati, while my youngest sister Becca is a pediatric nurse at UK Healthcare, living just 20 minutes from our parents. Our family is the kind that keeps a constant group text thread, bickers about football before the turkey is even cooked during Thanksgiving, and rushes to help whenever anyone encounters trouble, sometimes to the point of annoyance. I recognize that not everyone shares this experience. After 11 years in this job, I have come to appreciate this reality deeply. Wren, I wish to share with you who she was when we first met, as her true self was genuine. Beneath any layers, whoever she had been before, the woman I fell for wasn't a facade. Our paths crossed at a continuing education seminar in Louisville. In Frankfort, she functioned as a licensed clinical counselor for a private practice, focusing on individual therapy with adults. At a seminar about trauma-informed methods in client care, we sat together during the afternoon breakout session. During this time, she politely contested the facilitator's remarks concerning attachment theory without equivocation. Noticing my nod of agreement, she subtly conveyed her appreciation through a look. Following the session's conclusion, we shared coffee, which ultimately evolved into dinner and later into a 3-hour discussion on our respective work, the reasons behind our professional inclinations, and the costs and rewards thereof. By the time I navigated I-64 that evening, I had already discerned that she was distinct from any individual I'd previously encountered. She possessed a remarkable ability to articulate clearly and cautiously, much like someone carefully choosing each step on an icy sidewalk. She possessed a subtle, unexpected humor. Beyond that, she exhibited profound empathy in her professional interactions. She was the type of counselor who discussed her clients with care, avoiding identifiers, genuinely concerned for their overall well-being. We spent 4 months apart, Louisville to Frankfort, until she shifted her caseload to a practice in Frankfort, and we located an apartment on Wilkinson Boulevard. We adapted well to cohabiting. Our living situation flowed seamlessly without causing tension. We established routines. As is customary when 2 individuals build a genuine life together, the topic of family emerged organically. My family was frequently mentioned because they were boisterous, involved, and hard to ignore in any discussion. I shared stories about Theo, Becca, our Sunday dinners, and my mother's persistent worry over whether everyone had eaten enough. When I inquired about hers, she fell silent, a silence I recognized. The pensive stillness of someone weighing how much of themselves to share with you. "I don't have family," she declared. "Not anymore. My parents perished during my late 20s. I'm alone. I didn't push for information. I'd observed enough mourners to understand that one doesn't probe unless offered." Over the ensuing months, scattered facts emerged. Her parents had departed within a few years, her mother preceding her father. She was an only child. Since her early 20s, she had effectively been on her own, which she admitted was a factor that attracted her to helping professions. She needed assistance herself, yet no one came, so she decided to be the one who offered it to others. I handled each detail with caution. I believed her account as one believes something when the speaker seems to embody it. For 2 years, she never disclosed a hometown. She rarely spoke of childhood companions, distant relatives, or cherished vacation memories. If I probed with a particular query like, "Where did you originate? How would you describe your neighborhood?" she would respond vaguely, "A modest town, unspectacular, a place simpler to forget." I chose not to pry. I admired her. Trusting someone involves making that decision, and each subsequent detail is viewed through the lens of the choice already made. My commitment was solidified. The first fissure emerged 8 months before our wedding, when we were finalizing the guest list. We sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and coffee growing cold on both our elbows. I had about 40 people from my side, relatives, close friends, likable work associates. Wren only listed 23 names, all colleagues or acquaintances from her career or Louisville, Lexington. There wasn't a single family name mentioned. I didn't view it as suspicious. Rather, I felt compassion for her omission. I stretched my hand across the table and touched hers, saying, "I'm sorry your parents can't attend." She nodded in response. I recognized the subtle movement of her jaw, a precursor to what she would later express on her face. "It's just one of those things," she replied. "You learn to accept it." I confided that my family was now hers. My sentiment held true. She gently squeezed my hand and steered the conversation towards the deposit for the venue. The second rift appeared 3 months down the line, when my mother, with good intentions, asked if she could contact someone from Wren's circle prior to the wedding. Trying to ensure everyone felt included in the planning, as she had done for every family event over the past 30 years, she said, "Owen, I simply want to make sure no one from Wren's sphere feels overlooked during the preparations. Should I call someone?" I informed her there was no one to contact, that Wren had no living family members. My mother fell silent for a moment before saying, "That's terribly sad, dear." One evening, I shared my forgetfulness issue with Wren during our dinner conversation, not as an interrogation, but simply relaying a previous discussion. Her response was typical. She found it endearing, expressed no concern, and mentioned her long-resolved peace. However, a fleeting expression on her face sparked a subtle unease within me, not yet suspicion. I chose to disregard it with a wedding to arrange, work responsibilities, and my personal life to manage. The uneasy feeling persisted, growing despite being overlooked. 6 weeks before the wedding, while driving through Lawrenceburg from Anderson County, I encountered a woman walking her dog on Main Street. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that encounter nurtured the lingering discomfort. Apart from her, the woman moved identically to Wren. Nothing like Wren's walk. It was precisely Wren's walk. A subtle forward tilt, an efficient stride, the way she kept her arms close to her body, all reminiscent of Wren. Before I could get a proper glimpse of her face, I drove past. I convinced myself I was hallucinating. I was exhausted. Lawrenceburg is a small town, and people often walk on Main Street, leading our minds to recognize familiar figures. I told myself every excuse and kept driving. Yet I had previously taken a different route in Lawrenceburg during home visits, and 2 days later, when I didn't have a visit scheduled in Anderson County, found myself taking that same route, claiming I needed gas. The gas station on my usual route was sufficient, but I passed it by. I didn't see the woman again. However, upon arriving home that night, I casually looked up information about Lawrenceburg history, demographics, and so forth. A sort of aimless browsing one can justify as insignificant. Then I searched for more specific details. I'm not boasting about my actions that followed, and I won't try to sugarcoat it by saying it felt right at the time, but I looked up Wren's full name in Kentucky, specifically Anderson County. The top result was a Facebook profile I hadn't known existed. Wren had told me she wasn't active on social media. That detail was one of the endearing things about her. She considered it psychologically damaging and chose not to engage. I respected that. However, this profile belonged to her. The face was familiar, but a different last name was attached. Not the last name she had when we met. Instead, an older surname, her name prior to apparently changing it. The profile was mostly private, but the profile picture was public, and in the photo, Ren was standing between two elderly individuals on what appeared to be a porch. Both people were smiling, including Ren. The caption of the photo simply had a heart emoji, but the date showed it was 18 months old. That was around the time we were cohabiting, a time when I thought her parents had passed away. After that incident, I spent a considerable amount of time at my desk. Later, I discovered Ren's father's name from a partially visible tag in a post Kenneth Albright. Within 20 minutes, I found this name listed in the property records of Anderson County 4417 Glensford Drive, Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, only 41 minutes away from our apartment. That night, I didn't approach Ren. I want you to comprehend how I made that choice. This was not a premeditated move or an act of cold calculation. It wasn't about planning a retaliation. Instead, I was a man at home, barely a month and a half from my wedding, experiencing the unsettling sensation one gets when the supposedly stable ground beneath them suddenly reveals itself as thin ice over deep water. I could feel the chill seeping up through it. I was trying to move slowly, cautiously. Ren was in the living room reading. She wore her usual blue cardigan on evenings when she didn't go out. She looked exactly like herself. That was the most disconcerting part. I bid her good night earlier than usual. I informed her of my early departure. She gave me a kiss on the cheek without looking away from her book and wished me good night's sleep. I remained awake until 1:30 a.m. The question that kept recurring, not about the betrayal or the lie, but the reason, was something I couldn't fathom. Ren was a clinical counselor who specialized in helping traumatized individuals. She was more aware than most of the long-term consequences of secrets. Why would she invest 2 years and agree to marry me while concealing something so fundamental and close? What was hidden within the house on Glensford Drive that she wanted me unaware of? I drove to Lawrenceburg on a Thursday morning, when Ren had a full client schedule and wouldn't leave her office until 6. I told my superior I was conducting a home visit in Anderson County, which wasn't entirely false. I did have a case with a family in Lawrenceburg, and I stopped there first, completed the visit, documented it, and sat in my car for 15 minutes before driving to Glensford Drive. The house was a quaint, one-story ranch dwelling situated on a tranquil residential lane, neatly maintained yet unpretentious. Displayed prominently was an American flag on the porch, with well-cared-for flower beds that bore the signs of seasonal upkeep. A late-model Buick occupied the driveway, a vehicle characteristic of individuals who prioritize practicality and diligent care. I stayed in front of it for some time before stepping out and knocking. The man who opened the door was a man from the late 60s, with gray hair, lean figure, and precise movements indicative of someone managing a health condition discreetly. His gaze held a polite yet cautious expression as he assessed my identity. Upon my introduction, I disclosed that I was his daughter's fiancée. This revelation left an indelible impression on me, as it was not the reaction of a man unaware of his daughter's engagement. Kenneth, a man in anticipation, waited with an unyielding, defined endurance characteristic of those unable to bridge distance, eagerly awaited this specific moment to materialize. His name was Kenneth. Without pause, he invited me indoors. A woman emerged from a hallway, Carol Wren's mother, smaller than anticipated, bearing Wren's eyes, and radiating the natural affection of someone where compassion is not a tactic but an instinct. She recognized me, saying, "You're Owen." They guided me to their living room, and they shared the truth with cautious precision, the kind people employ when they've been holding it for a long time, contemplating its proper delivery. In over 3 years, Wren had ceased communication. The rift was not a mutual or clean separation. For 3 years, attempts were made via letters, childhood friends, and a shared family contact to reach Wren about an incident she hadn't fully forgiven, according to Kenneth. He conveyed this not with resentment towards Wren, but with the weary, persistent affection of a parent who understands that love sometimes necessitates waiting without assurance of reciprocation. Carol disclosed the details of the event. At age 24, Wren had been engaged previously to a man named Davis, whom she'd met in graduate school and whose introduction by her parents, discreetly through family ties, carried a burden it should not have. The engagement ended painfully. It wasn't Davis who was affected. They claimed he eventually recovered. The problem lay in the breakup itself. 6 months prior to the wedding, Wren uncovered information about Davis that her parents had kept hidden. A history with a former partner serious enough to warrant disclosure, yet they remained silent due to fondness and faith in things turning out well, ultimately making an incorrect decision. Upon learning of their omission, Wren expressed, in her own terms, through the single letter she'd ever penned to them following the split, that the individuals meant to shield her were prioritizing another's comfort over her security. She severed all ties, restored her surname to her maternal grandname, established a new career under that name, and later disclosed to the man she rekindled affection for that her parents were deceased. The prospect of detailing what transpired, dissecting that past, accommodating it in a fresh relationship where she yearned for security was something she could not confront. I stayed in that living room for 2 hours. Kenneth displayed pictures, Wren at 12 roaring with laughter over something unseen. Wren at 17, solemn-faced on her high school graduation, retaining the same posture. Wren at 22 in grad school, posing with her parents during Parents' Weekend, her arm around her mother's shoulders, both of them mid-laughter. Carol brewed coffee. She subtly probed me about my job, Frankfurt, and how Wren appeared to be faring. Craving any details, she concealed her eagerness. She inquired, displaying the calculated reserve of someone who had learned to accept only what was given. Before departing, Kenneth stood at the door and fixed me with an expression I believe will linger in my memory for my entire career, as it was a look I'd seen before, the unique dignity of an individual bearing a burden they feel they deserved, even when its weight became unbearable. We made a mistake, he admitted. What we did to Renaa was wrong. Renaa, her true name before she adopted a shorter version. This detail I mentally stored away. But she's our child, and we love her. And whatever you choose to do with the information we shared today, that decision is yours to make. We simply want her to be okay. I drove home along US 127, gripping the steering wheel tightly, while my mind raced through several places simultaneously. I did not inform Wren about my visit to Lawrenceburg on that night, or the one following. With only 6 weeks remaining before the wedding, I found myself requiring time I didn't possess, struggling to comprehend the truth and its implications for the future. Regardless of how I attempted to analyze it logically, I kept returning to this same predicament. I was aware of Wren, yet articulating my understanding without appearing to make excuses for her proved challenging, because she had indeed acted wrongly. For 2 years, she had fabricated a fundamental aspect of our relationship, lying about the death of her parents. She had allowed me to grieve for people who were alive and merely 40 minutes away from us. This was a significant breach, transcending ordinary dishonesty and violating the specific trust essential for marriage. However, I also understood, having worked in this field for 11 years, the deep impact of parental betrayal during childhood on an individual's psyche. I understood the pain of those who should guard you choosing their own ease instead. I also comprehended the process of constructing an entirely new self after such a traumatic event, piece by piece, until the old narrative seemed perilous enough to hide it thoroughly. Wren was not a deceiver in the sense commonly used for something insincere and contrived. Wren was an individual who endured by isolating the hurt and refused to reopen it, not even for me, even amidst love. That didn't make it acceptable, but it conveyed insight about how I should handle what was to follow. Exactly 10 days after my trip to Lawrenceburg, I invited Wren to join me on a Sunday afternoon. She sensed something imminent. All week, I had observed her intuition, similar to how sensitive individuals predict a shift in weather before rain. She sat opposite me at our familiar kitchen table, where we'd planned gatherings and enjoyed countless everyday meals. Her demeanor was quiet, readying herself for whatever was about to unfold. I disclosed everything in a collected manner. The woman from Main Street, her Facebook profile, property records, Glensford Drive, Kenneth and Carol, the 2 hours spent in their living room, the coffee, the photographs, Davis's tale, and the secrets her parents had concealed. As I spoke, I kept my gaze on her face, fearful of what might manifest there. Throughout a decade of this profession, I've witnessed a variety of responses to being exposed, not all of which could be salvaged. Yet, what I observed was neither defensiveness nor anger. Instead, I saw a woman disintegrating in a manner she'd spent years preventing. At last, in the kitchen of the apartment she shared with her most trusted companion. She flattened her palms on the tabletop, pressing firmly as if to halt an impending tremor. Her gaze was fixed on a specific point on the surface. "I comprehend," she admitted. "I'm aware of my actions." I prompted her for conversation. The revelations that ensued during the following hour were not entirely new to me. They were a comprehensive account, revealing aspects I hadn't noticed from my external perspective. The engagement with Davis, what her parents had been privy to, the letter she'd penned. The long silence that set in, initially justified and essential, later transforming into something else. Not sorrow per se, but a form of detachment toward that entire past. A choice made on autopilot that if she simply avoided returning there, she wouldn't have to feel it. She encountered me, and she wished to distinguish herself with me, promising herself she would clarify it later, but never did. The deception that initially served as a shield solidified into something she couldn't unravel without potentially losing everything she had constructed. "I was going to inform you before the wedding," she admitted. It sounded rehearsed because it was. I kept telling myself that before the wedding. I questioned if it was the truth. She gazed at me, her gaze unwavering despite the collapse of everything else. "I'm not sure," she said. "I wanted it to be true." That confession cost her something. I could see it. I held it delicately. Our wedding wasn't on the original date. We postponed it by 3 months. It was the most difficult phone call I've ever made to my mother, and she deserved a more substantial explanation than I could provide at that moment. I informed her that Ren and I required additional time, asserting it wasn't an end, urging her to have faith in me. She replied, "Oh, and whatever you require, that's the essence of family for me." Ren opted to consult a psychotherapist, a professional separate from her social sphere, someone with no connection to her career. This wasn't a mandate on my part. Instead, she took this step independently the week following our kitchen table discussion. It was a crucial indicator not that she had caused me pain, but that she comprehended the essence of the pain and was prepared to undertake the necessary effort. We attended couples therapy sessions with Dr. Pauline Garrett on Thursday evenings. These sessions, challenging and critical as they were, marked the most significant personal endeavor I've engaged in over the past 36 years. I reached out to Kenneth. 6 weeks following my initial visit, I returned to Lawrenceburg to share the details and the subsequent events with him. He expressed gratitude in a manner that suggests one is thanked when words seem too small. A few days later, Carol sent me a handwritten card filled with 4 paragraphs of heartfelt, detailed appreciation, which I've kept in my desk drawer. Ren and her parents initiated correspondence via letters rather than phone calls or visits. They opted for letters because they offer control over the speed of communication. Kenneth and Carol penned the initial missives. Ren informed me about each letter she received, but chose to withhold their contents, a choice I respected without inquiry. It took 4 months before she consented to a phone call, and 7 months before agreeing to travel to Lawrenceburg. On an October Saturday, similar to the time of my proposal, I drove her there. I parked the car on Glensford Drive, and Ren stayed seated for a span of 3 minutes before exiting. I didn't accompany her indoors. It wasn't my domain. I navigated to a coffee shop on Main Street, spent 2.5 hours engrossed in a book, and upon receiving her text, I returned to retrieve her from the porch. She declined to disclose what transpired inside. Throughout the journey home, she remained mostly silent. Approximately at Millville, she placed her hand on my arm, and I perceived a subtle tremble. I covered her hand with mine, and we continued our journey in silence. We exchanged vows in February, a smaller ceremony than anticipated, with only 40 guests instead of 70, held at a historic inn beside the Kentucky River outside Frankfort. It was chilly enough to observe everyone's breath during the outdoor segment. My sister Becca shed tears before we even completed the vows. At Ren, her mother displayed the affection usually reserved for her own offspring, while Kenneth and Carol Albright seated themselves in the 3rd row on Ren's side of the aisle. The latter wore a dress Carol had bought specifically for this visit, which she'd kept hidden in the closet. Kenneth donned an old suit that hadn't seen daylight in over a decade, having been freshly ironed 3 times by himself. Before the ceremony commenced, Ren stole a brief glance at them from the front of the room, and her expression betrayed something complex, not joy, but rather a more intricate emotion akin to someone walking a prolonged path, uncertain of its destination yet choosing to continue. This is the most truthful account I can offer regarding our current state. We are opting. Each day, fully cognizant of past damages and continually working towards constructing something that acknowledges them, we are making a choice. Reflecting on this narrative extensively since then, I realize it resonates with my profession as a social worker, prompting me to ponder why individuals behave in certain ways. The conclusion I frequently reach is something I strive to recall both at work and in life. People do not deceive about the people they cherish or the pain those individuals inflict upon them due to an absence of conscience. They lie because the reality of that hurt surpasses their capacity to bear it in a new context. They lie because they have strived to begin anew, sincerely so, and this fresh start necessitated constructing a barrier. Over time, this barrier became integral, like a support beam, making the idea of its removal seem dangerous as it might bring down the entire structure. This doesn't justify their deceit, but it implies that the question, "How could you?" may not always be appropriate. The crucial question was, what item made you believe this course of action was inevitable? This was the query posed to Wren in the counselor's office, a question she eventually came to understand. I'm not narrating this tale as a model of how one should act, nor am I suggesting that every secret warrants the compassion I extended to this one. There are secrets that alter the entire scenario, those concerning safety, different forms of betrayal, and choices beyond reversal. I was aware enough of my circumstances to recognize that Wren's actions, while significant, did not fit into that category. I'm sharing this story because it happened, because the genuine account is messier and more authentic than the simplified one, and I believe the complex version is the one worth contemplating. I'm sharing this with you since I forced open a door that my partner wished remained shut, and what lay hidden within wasn't a beast or a transgression. It was a family who had wounded their child and yet continued to cherish her despite the separation, and a woman who endured that pain in the only method she knew, bearing a price she hadn't fully calculated. And I'm disclosing this to you because the lesson I gleaned from those 2.5 hours spent at a coffee shop on Main Street in Lawrenceburg, waiting for my partner to engage in her most challenging conversation as an adult, was that love isn't the lack of mysteries. Love is the choice you make when you discover there were some. After much thought, I chose to remain, not out of blindness nor without conditions, but following arduous months of counseling filled with doubt, sorrow, and reflection on the information received and its implications for the relationship we were constructing. Yet I persisted, and what transpired surpassed our previous state. Our current situation holds a depth that the earlier version, unaware of its foundational instability, could never achieve. The earlier state was built on sand, despite our ignorance. What we have now is fortified by trials overcome. Last month, Wren and I dined with her parents. Kenneth prepared his renowned pulled pork on the outdoor smoker, a significant annual event that Carol expressed regret for my absence at numerous occasions. The evening was ordinary in its essence, yet extraordinary in its context. 4 individuals gathering around a table in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, discussing random topics, exhibiting the unique comfort of people who have willingly endured some sacrifice to share space. One instance saw Carol gently touch Wren's hand over the table, fleetingly, and it was Wren who guided her. Meanwhile, Kenneth continued discussing the need for additional cayenne in the rub, seemingly oblivious to this subtle interaction. This seemingly insignificant moment turned out to be one of the most impactful scenes I've observed recently. Walls can crumble suddenly or gradually at a pace that is uniquely theirs. All you can do is remain observant, patient, and truthful so you're there when they fall. What struck me about this situation was Owen's response. He could have left upon learning the truth, but instead, he asked why before asking what should be done next. This is uncommon. Most often, we act impulsively before fully comprehending a situation. I frequently ponder over this event, reflecting on how much we miss out on due to premature reactions. So, here's my question for you: would you have stayed too? I'm truly eager to know your views on this topic. For those not already subscribers, it's a great moment to join. A new tale is about to be released shortly.